Kedves vendégeink, Görög Borbála vagyok, a Magyar-Amerikai Szövetségnek az új Cultural Chair personje, aki ezt a rendezvényt megszervezte mai napon. És szeretettel köszöntünk mindenkit ezen a szép október 23-ai napon, amikor még a nap is egy pillanatig sütött. És amikor az 1956-os forradalomra, azok hősére emlékezünk itt együtt. Tisztelettel köszöntöm azokat az 56-osokat, akik elfogadták a meghívásunkat és eljöttük a mai ünnepére. Kérem szépen, hogy álljon fel Kramár Mária. Köszönöm szépen, hogy eljött. Köszönöm. Szabja Ilona és Szabja János. Zincsen Zsuzsa. Koros Horváth Márta. Ahogyan mondtam, ma elsősorban ünnepelni jöttünk össze. Ünnepeljük 56 hőseit, akik itt élnek ma is közöttünk, és mesélnek a csodáról, ami akkor október 23-án történt. És azokat is ünnepeljük, akik ma csak lélekben vannak velünk. Ünnepeljük a szabadságot, amiért az ember a végsőkig elmegy. Ünnepeljük a hitet, amelyet azok a fiatalok éreztek, akik az elnyomás ellen föllázadtak. A hitet abban, hogy a jó ügyért mindig érdemes lesz harcolni. Éppen ezért a mi beszélgetésünk résztvevői között több fiatal is részt vesz majd, hogy 1956 szellemiségét mi is át tudjuk venni. A szívünkbe zárjuk a gondolatokat, az emlékeket, a hitet és a szabadság iránti vágyat, és továbbadhassuk majd a következő felnövekvő generációnak. És ez a mi szent kötelességünk és büszke hagyatékunk. Now I'm going to ask Marty to say it in English.
Dear guests, we would like to welcome you on behalf of the Hungarian-American Association of Washington on this beautiful day when we commemorate and celebrate the revolution and its heroes of the 23rd of October 1956. I would like to especially welcome our honored guests who agreed to join us today. As I mentioned, we came to celebrate the heroes of 1956 who still live among us. They can tell us about the miracle that was the 23rd of October. We commemorate those who could only join us in spirit today. Let's celebrate the freedom that is worth fighting for, the faith of those who dare to rebel against the oppression, their belief in the cause that is worth fighting for. We have several young audience members in today's celebration who can understand and learn about 1956. We feel the faith and the desire for freedom and keep these ideas close to our hearts so that we can hand it down to the next generation. This is our obligation and proud legacy.
Our Scouts group to please bring forward the flags and put it down next to them. Now we are going to sing the Hungarian national anthem. You please take your seats. I would like to ask Peter Pollard to please present the poem he brought today for us.
Horváth piroska, rezdült a föld. Október, csillagok voltak nagy robajjal. Tankok dübörögtek hatalmas morrajjal. Ahol macskakövön forradalmár lépett, magyar lobogónak a szíve kiégett. Reményük a szabadság és hitt a hazának, nem bízni idegen, elnyomó szavának. Hős forradalomnak vérben izzott lángja, soha nem alszik ki szívünkben szikrája.
I would like to ask Emese Orwell to please represent the poem.
Aranyosi Ervin, október 23, 1956 emlékére. Idegen népek állnak vállaikon, saját hazánkban rabként tartanak, de bennünk a vágy már nem maradhat titkon, hiába tankok, gyilkos vadhadak. Bilincs a kézen, békjól köt a földhöz, de mindez gyenge, míg lelkünk szabad. Hazug világ, ma tőlünk messze költöz, igaz magyar, hát mutasd meg magad. Meg annyi nép már átkázolt felettünk, s uralt minket, hát ebből már elég. Tatár, török, Habsburg, Csicskása lettünk, Trianon s nácit is mögötte nép. Felszabadítók rabolták hazánkat, s vittek minden, mi mozdítható. Hagytak tengődni, mert ez volt a látszat, de szívta vérünk a tolvaj hódító. S jött egy nap, október 23, hitet hozott a hűvös őszi szél, szabaddá válunk végre minden áron, a bátor szív egy szebb jövőt remél. Igaz szívek a nemzetért dobognak, s elárult lelkek mernek hinni már, barikádon lyukas zászlók lobognak, szabadság nélkül az életünk sivár. Áldott a hős, ki kiáll a hazáért, s minden áruló legyen átkozott. Szeresd hazád, felelős vagy a máért, amely reményt és szabadságot hozott.
Thank you very much for your poems, and this is how the next generation is taking it from our heroes, so that we can pass it on to even youngers. So in the next 50 and 100 years, we are going to gather and celebrate this and never forget this very important thing that happened on the 23rd of October. So I wrote some questions. This is how it's going to happen. These questions are also interesting for those who lived in 1956, but for the coming generations to think about this. And we are going to share their thoughts on these topics. My first question is going to be, always I will ask someone at 56, and then I'm going to ask some of the scouts to answer the same question, to see what's in their mind and to see that. Now I'm going to ask Ilona, what is the first question that comes to your mind about the 23rd of October? What is the first thought on your mind?
It's on? Yes, it's on. Yes. Yes. Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is freedom. We so wanted to have freedom. You know, in Hungary, we had the Nazis, then we had the communists who took over, and we had them for so long. And by that time, the Soviets should have left. And, you know, the state contract of the Austrians was signed in 1955 in July. And according to that, the Soviets should have left 90 days after that, but they didn't. And so we were very excited about that. So why in the world don't they leave? And then people started to think about things, and then they started to talk about things. And in the end, my husband and I, we were at the point where at the university, he was a professor, I was a student at the technical university, where they basically the night before they wrote the 16 points, and then on the 23rd, we were just so excited about going to the statue of General Ben, who was a Polish hero, but he helped us in 1848. And in Gdansk, the workers were having a strike, and so we wanted to demonstrate that we are feeling with them. That was all. We were not going to have an uprising. We were just so very happy that finally we can say something about our freedom. And in the 16 points, of course, we have the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech, association, religion, all those things that we take for granted here. And so they let us go first, and then they said, no, we can't go. And then again they said we can go, and then again they said we can't go. And in the end they let us go. And so we went to pick up our children, a 4-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, from the nursery school at the university. And I was 9 months pregnant at the time. So we went to the parliament, because by that time the crowd went over to the parliament. And there we were hoping to see Imre Nagy. And it was Imre Nagy because he was the only communist who was a prime minister, and under him there were all kinds of reforms. And we wanted to have at least that. So we were, and the others were all either in prison or executed already. So we went there, and in the meantime, somebody cut out the coat of arms, the communist coat of arms from the flag. And so then that became our flag. And Imre Nagy started to speak, and he said, Elvtársak, továrosi. And everybody said, no. So then he said, friends. And then he did speak something, but he couldn't speak freely yet. And then the crowd decided to go to the radio station. And at that point, my husband said, you know, in front of the parliament, there was at least 250,000 people. And that place there does not really house 250,000 people, only about 100,000. So it was really squished, and being pregnant. So what happened was that I simply, he said, let's go home. So we went to get the children from my mother, and we went home with the very last bus to Óbuda, because we lived in Óbuda, and this was in the middle of Budapest, which is pretty far. So then we went home, and they went to the radio station. And were you at the radio station? No. So what happened at the radio station was that there were two lanes and in a two-lane street. Now, can you imagine that crowd of 250,000 was pushing itself into those two lanes? And they let the committee go in, but the committee never came out, and they never read the 16 points in the radio. And then somebody must have pushed something, I don't know. But at that point, the AWO started shooting from the houses, from the rooftops, from the windows, from everywhere. Nobody had any arms. The people were throwing back bricks, and then somebody remembered that there was an armory close by, so they went to the armory and got some arms from the soldiers who also wanted freedom. And that was so beautiful, that everybody was so united in getting their freedom that even the communists said the Soviets should leave and we should have free elections. And that would be the best for us. So Hungary was as united as never before. Hungarians are not usually united, you know, but we were very united at that time.
Thank you. What's your first thought about October 23rd?
Well, my first thoughts are always about the Stalin statue. Somehow this is my first thought every time I think about 1956, the destruction and the destroyed hand, which has a picture about there, and the symbol of the dictator destroyed, and happy people around the head with freedom in their eyes, and I can't imagine how they felt, but I get the tiny little bit what they went through in these days. So, yep.
Thank you. Thank you. My next question, I will ask Zsuzsa, what does freedom means for you?
Freedom means to me to be here in America. I've been back to Hungary several times, and I'm happy to see the people thriving there now. Is this? Yes. Okay. I kind of have prepared a little speech about my being here in the States, and I'll start right at the beginning. These are some events that are not in the regular papers. So my original name was Urda Zsuzsa, and I was born in 1940. My parents and little brother lived in Pest until 47. My dad owned a car parts store with a partner who was Jewish, and luckily his Jewishness was kind of hidden by the store itself. When the communist state began nationalizing large industries, my father saw the handwriting on the wall, and they would be coming for the smaller firms, and he might be next. So he sold the store and bought a 4-story house in Moskvatev, which is now Szélkámán-tér, as it used to be before, and we moved. I learned to swim at age 12. Soon after at a local pool, my brother, who could not swim, jumped in and sank. I dove in and pulled him out. Since then, he has twice been on the world champion polo team. I was 16 years old and competing when the Melbourne Olympics were scheduled for the fall of 1956. In Australia, summer is November, December, January, February. So in Hungary, selection of the athletes for the games was done by a committee, not by an extended competition as it is here now. And I was selected. In October, the demonstrations began. They became a revolution to protect the athletes from being involved in the dangerous activities. The committee decided to locate all the Olympic team at the top of János Hegy. And they took us to Margit-sziget from there to train regularly because we were firmly cloistered on top of János Hegy. None of the athletes participated in the demonstrations, riots, or combat. One evening they did take us down to Budapest itself to break up our cabin fever. After the movie, we heard that Joseph Stalin's enormous steel statue had been pulled down and broken at the top of his boots. When we got there, the statue was gone, and the crowd dragged it down Andrassy út to the radio station. Next, I remember going down to my home in Moszkva and pack my things. Then by myself, riding my bicycle down to Margit-sziget to the swimming complex to pick up my swimming stuff. That there was no fighting at that area, no Vilmos was running, and the buildings and streets all had bullet holes in them. I had to dodge around the craters and the piles of rubble in the streets. Back at home without problems, I packed my suitcase, which my mother had modified. She cut stitches in the lining, put in $40 from a tomato can hidden in the front garden, and then sewed it up, matching the original needle holes. It was time to go. My dad and I set out for János Hegy on foot. The cog railway was still not running. Apu was carrying my suitcase. Because of the revolution, the airlines chartered from France would not land at BP, Budapest. So we had to go by bus to Prague. I sat in the back of the bus and I climbed the front steps of the bus and hollered back at me to say, "If you can, stay out," which was a brave thing to say out loud in a communist environment. At the Magyar-Czech border, we were held up in the dark for hours while the guards checked everything. We were released to cross the Danube about 2 a.m. Later, I was told that the Russian tanks turned into the road and went over the bridge into Hungary as soon as our buses passed. We were the last ones to legally cross the border for some time. The buses took us to a school near Prague, where we slept, stayed a few days, worked out for a couple of days, until the Air France planes would come for us. Our flight was on Prague planes and took home times as long as 8 to 10 days. We don't quite remember. Our first stop was in Turkey. We then flew over Saudi Arabia, where we saw for the first time oil refineries with the flames from the flares burning off natural gas. Next refueling stop was India. We assembled on the pavement. Mr. Nehru, the Prime Minister then, came to speak to us and rode around us in a convertible so we could all get close to him. Next up was Singapore. We stopped for a couple of days so that the athletes could get some training time. The swimming pool was, to my astonishment, filled with seawater. without goggles at that time. Our eyes burned. Who could swim in that? They warned us not to drink the water because it had bacteria in it. And I followed directions, brush my teeth with using the tap water. That was enough to give me an intestinal infection. Luckily, by the time the game started, I was well enough to compete. Then we flew down to about Melbourne. My recollection is watching the totally barren land below us for hours of flight, prop planes. At 16, I could not have imagined that much nothing. Landing in Melbourne, we went directly to the Olympic Village where the teams were segregated by countries, by nationalities. At home, the Russians won. They used a big park, Városmajor, on Buda, behind the house, our house, for a tank lager. One afternoon, a board soldier loaded his cannon and fired a random shot. My mother was in the kitchen cooking and then went to the other side of the house to use the facilities. The shell exploded on a corner of the kitchen and destroyed 2 walls. My father eventually repaired it, even though the state should have. In 2017, the floor tiles still had the chips in them from the shrapnel. It just reminded us of God's care for us. Few people recall the Hungarian swim team in action. Everybody in the world remembers a Hungarian water polo member emerging from the pool with a cut on his forehead, blood streaming down his face. During the final match, he was attacked by a Russian swimmer. He fought back. The umpire stopped the match and awarded the victory to Hungary. Officials feared an outbreak of the events in Budapest streets could be played out in the pool. One afternoon, when my event was scheduled for late afternoon, a group of us took a bus and went to a movie in English. My watch stopped, and when I realized that I bolted into a taxi bound for the swimming pool, I changed into my suit and arrived shortly before the start time for my race. The coach, who was of the Olympic team's coach, but not my coach from Budapest, he was furious and publicly and soundly shouted insults at me and removed me from the swim relay, but I was swimming my own event. Naturally, I did not win a medal. It must be noted that the Aussies had quietly developed 3 swimmers that surpassed the rest of the world of swimming. They swam far faster times than any of us in Europe or in the Americas. The American dorm was across the street from the Hungarian dorm. Shuttles buses ran between the pool where we practiced for a few days before and after our scheduled events. I missed my bus and another bus was leaving for the American dorm. I caught a ride back to the Olympic Village. I was befriended by an American swimmer from Mercer Island, Nancy Ramey. I did not speak English, but enjoyed getting the ride from the Americans. Unbeknownst to me, Nancy telegraphed her parents on Mercer Island and told them about this Hungarian swimmer she had met. And she probably said to her parents too, "Can I keep her? Can I keep her?" At the end of the games, we were all called to a meeting with the Hungarian non-athletes, the administrators, and government watchers. They asked who, if anybody, was planning to avoid going back to Hungary. They said the planes are expensive, and if you can't afford, if you don't have to pay for 2 planes and one would be enough, then they would let one go. Nobody raised their hands. Okay, have your bags packed to the bus. Be at the bus by 8 o'clock. We board at 8:30 and leave at 9. If you miss the bus, you're on your own. 4 years previously, the managers had physically dragged reluctant athletes onto the planes. This time they were in a bind. Communications with Hungary was zero. Long-distance calls would be exorbitant. Nobody knew what was happening at home. If the managers had been lax and invited anybody to stay behind who wished to, and the Russians won, they would have been in big trouble when they got home. If the leaders were brutal and dragged us onto the planes and the freedom fighters had won, they might be hanging from lampposts. So they were very politically correct and went through the motions and said nothing. After the planes left for Hungary, we stayed at the Olympic Village Dome for a couple of weeks. The press made a big event out of our staying behind. And I got a number of marriage proposals by mail in English. Australia had been a penal colony for Britain. There was an overpopulation of males. At 16, I was eligible in Australia. At home, I was a child. That was true in America too. At that time, I married at 25. After a couple of weeks or so, Henry Luce, a publisher of Life, Look, and Sports Illustrated, chartered a TWA super constellation to come to Australia and bring us to the US. He prevailed on his friends in Congress to give all of us green cards on arrival. On the flight, an older athlete stood in the aisle and got everybody's attention. This is what he said. All of us are comfortable with the way life is lived in Hungary. In America, it is not like Hungary. There are lots of things different. If you want the best experience, never in your mind say, this is not like at home. The customs, the food, transportation, schools at home are better. For a while, you will not be comfortable, but in the end, you will be successful. Years later, my husband got a job in Germany and we New York his same speech. We landed in Fiji for a fuel stop just before daylight. As we walked down the stairs from the airplane and walked across 50 meters of tarmac to the terminal, it went from night to daylight, full daylight. The sun appeared instantly, 100% brightness and hot, no twilight. The media in America was announcing our soon arrival in San Francisco. Nancy Rainey, who I met in Melbourne, her dad, driving home from work on Christmas Eve, got off I-90 at Mercer Island. He went to a travel agency, got a round-trip ticket for Nancy and a one-way ticket from San Francisco to Seattle for me. As we got an envelope at the San Francisco airport with documents from Immigration Service and mailed around, Nancy appeared. She picked up my suitcase and said, "Okay, come on." And her dad met us at SeaTac and took us home. And that's how I am stuck in Seattle area. Meanwhile, in Budapest, a sports ministry called my mother in for a hostile interrogation. They started with, "Where is your daughter?" She had no idea. So she said, Yes, where is my daughter? She's 16 years old, a mere child. I gave her into your custody. You took her thousands kilometers away and lost her. I demand you bring her back. The bureaucrat ushered her to the door. But the state would not be denied. Then they caused my dad to lose his job for a year or more. My parents supported themselves by selling at flea markets. And that's my story.
Thank you very much for sharing. This is a beautiful story, and I'm happy that you found that freedom.
I was safe from all the fighting.
And thank you for coming.
Some of my friends did pass away in the fight. Some of my friends, swimming friends even, that stayed in Budapest did pass away during the fighting.
The one who was bleeding was her boyfriend at the time.
I have the same question. What does freedom means for you? Can you please state your name?
I'm Lola, and freedom for me, it's kind of a hard question to answer, but I always just kind of think of like Hungary now versus kind of like then, and like how like and like how lucky I am. And just I don't know.
I think this is a perfect answer. Thank you. My next question, I'm going to ask János, because you were a child when all this happened, what were kids playing, what were they engaging with them? What happened with children in 50s?
Hi, my name is János Sabja, or Sabja János, and I was a little over 2.5 years old when the revolution started on August 29th, about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, which is my Nevna, my name's day. My memory kind of comes in slowly, and it's been on ever since. And part of that is because of the trauma that happened starting at that point to the time that, I came to North America. And it's when we began, or let me rephrase that, when I began my memories, the kids, we were all conscious that something was happening. And most of us didn't really have a clue as to what was happening. Almost everybody's parents talked to the kids because we had better communication skills, I think, at that time because of the stress that everybody was under. Because we would, some of the kids didn't talk at all at my age, but a lot of us did. And we talked about the fact that our parents were telling us not to do things, to not say things, to this and that and the other thing. And I personally, when I had to go to, daycare, nursery school, whatever you want to call it, I refused to participate. And a lot of the kids would, go sit in the corner and just wait when the food came out, cookie time. We'd all go and we'd eat, and then we'd all totally disengage. We wouldn't listen to our instructors or teachers at all. We just refused. It was no particular reason why. We just knew not to talk to them because they were dangerous, Then, we did play, we'd play ball outside, we'd have fun, and it was basically, our parents did their best to keep it as normal as possible. And then when the revolution finally did start, the feeling of patriotism that was pushed down on us after we got picked up from school was like, holy smoke, this is like really cool. This is like a feeling, you know? We didn't know what it was, but it was a cool feeling because everybody was feeling it. And to digress, a couple of years later in Vancouver, BC, we had a memorial march on October 23 where we marched through downtown to, I think it was the statue of the unknown soldier or something, and put a wreath down. And during that march, I remember looking up at my dad and I went, are we walking toward Parliament? You know, because my assumption was as if we were in the same place again. All of a sudden my brain went back to it. But nonetheless, an example of something that occurred, we were in the basement, hiding out, because there was stuff going on all over the place. And Vilam, Lightning the dog, who was our neighbor's dog, ran up the stairs. Well, I didn't want him to get hurt, so I went chasing up after him. And just as I got to the top of the stairs, a couple of soldiers were coming by, and one of them leveled his rifle at me. And I froze, and all of a sudden I got yanked backwards down the stairs, and I believe it was my Aunt Elizabeth, I'm not sure. Yanked me backwards, dragged me down the stairs, and started telling me what a stupid thing that was I did. And it was, you know, it was that moment of terror when all of a sudden, you know, at 2 years old, this guy's pointing a rifle at me. And the one thing that I think that everybody needs to make a mental note of, especially those that are not a part of the whole Hungarian thought process that are here, is you notice that none of the people that have participated in this ever once said the Soviets. It's always the Russians. And when you think about the Ukraine and you think about the little kids, I think about the little kids in Ukraine all the time. Because they're going through the same thing that I went through and worse.
That would be terrifying. And it would be hard to sleep after that.
I'm going to ask the next question from Marta. If you would go to an unknown place and you could pack only a backpack, what would be those items that you would bring?
This is a real difficult question for me because I'm kind of a hoarder. Way too many things that I carry. It wouldn't fit into a backpack. But I don't have any prepared speech like Shusha did, but I brought something along, and this is my journal from 1956. I started to journal earlier than that and faithfully wrote down all the boys' things in my, in my journal. So in 1956, I was actually 15 years old and more interested in boys than anything else. And then comes this revolution. And so if you don't mind, one of these things I will pack in my backpack is my journal, please. And I would like to read a few entries from the Sopron. I'm from a border city and right on the Austrian border. And the kids here, I'm sure, are not familiar with Sopron. It's a mid-sized Hungarian city. 40,000 people were living there at that time. And a university town and many schools, so there was plenty of boys. But on Sopron 1956, October 24, Szerda. Did you know that? It was a Szerda. Wednesday. Borzasztó, kitört a forradalom Pesten. Már második napja folyik a véres harc. And you know, this is a 15-year-old girl, so you have to give me excuses. Most egy kis üzenetőt kaptam a forradalmi hangulatból, Petőfi hangulatából, amit a 48-as márciusi események idejében érezhetett, persze nagyobb mértékben, hisz ő ott volt Pesten. A dolog úgy kezdődött, hogy az ország főiskolásai, egyetemistái egymás után összefogtak és összeállították pontokba foglalva követeléseiket. Majd kedden délután Pesten és Sopronban is néma tüntetést tartottak, ezzel mutatva, hogy szolidaritást vállalnak a lengyel ifjúsággal, akiknél hasonlóan harcok folynak. Ebből a békés, néma tüntetésből robbant aztán ki a fegyveres forradalom, de csak Pesten, at that time. A forradalmárok a rádió épületét is elfoglalták, és ma egész nap csak zene szólt a rádióba, de milyen ócskán. Mert nem is a rendes stúdióból sugároztak. A minisztertanács elnöke a nép kívánságára Nagy Imre lett. Gerőt, akinek a kedd esti beszéde miatt robbant ki az egész história, a párt elnökévé vagy titkárává tették. A nép le akarta rombolni a Sztálin téri Sztálin szobrot is, de nem sikerült. Később sikerült. A katonaság és a rendőrség is melléjük állt. Aki ma este 6-kor nem tette le a fegyvert, a statáriális bíróság elé fogják állítani. So, what is that in English? What is that called in English? Statáriális bíróság.
Martial law.
Martial law. A pestiek azonban sokan folytatták a harcot, a lakosságnak nem szabad kimenni az utcára, a forradalom áll, és az üzletek sem nyitottak ki. Mindenki fel van izgatva, mindenki politizál, és várja a következményeket. Ezt írtam 24-én, röviden, 15 éves.
You were very well informed for a 15-year-old young girl. I mean, thank you for sharing. Yes.
So, then, of course, I was concerned about the boys, but what happens to them? But then, yeah, so what happened to them is many of them left Sopron with the university. And Helen and János, first-hand witnesses of that they all came out to Vancouver, BC, Canada, the first time in the history of immigration, accepted a whole group of university with a deacon, right? He was the deacon. Roland was the deacon. Yes, he was the deacon of the university, and he brought them, fortunately they were accepted as a group, and then they could continue their studies. But on couple of days later, October 28th, Sopronba a főiskolásoknak sikerült megakadályozni a fegyveres felkelést, which is important, there were no bloodshed in Sopron. De a gyárak itt is sztrájkban vannak. A főiskolások most ezekben a nehéz időkben megmutatták, hogy igazi magyar fiúk. Mindent ők intéztek, a kenyérsütéstől, a gyógyszerrakodásig, a zsákolástól, a rendőri őrjáratig. Minden üzem, gyár, iskola az ő tanácsukat, rendelkezésüket kérte, és a rendőrségtől a katonaságig mindenki rájuk hallgat. Nagy a felelősség a vállukon. Nem tudom, mi lesz az eredménye ennek a sok vérnek és áldozatnak. Az országban több rádió el van foglalva, de a fő, a Kossuth rádió nincs sajnos, és itt minden közlemény hazugság. Nagy Imre, a minisztertanács elnöke azt ígérte, hogy az ávót feloszlatják. So Imre Nagy promised on the radio that they would dissolve the communist ávó organization. A rendőrséget újjá szervezik, valószínűleg visszahozzák a régi Kossuth címert és még egy sereg üres blablabla. Isten segíts meg a 50 year old. Isten segíts meg a mi magyar népünket, és hozz rá mi esztendőket. So later I wrote in there that in 1956 márciusában volt a harcok október 28-án még nem értek véget, sőt, még sokáig tartottak. I was moved, emotionally, obviously moved by what was happening. And I felt this, it sounds pathetic, but I felt like, what is happening to my nation, my little country? And this is why I compared the time with the 1848 revolution, where Hungarian fought for freedom, and also the words of our anthem came to my mind. Isten áld meg a magyart. God bless Hungarians.
Amen.
So, one more thing, I did not come to America in 1956, like many of you there. My mother and sister and I went out to Vienna with all the people from Sopron. We just kind of like got on a bus and went over the border. But then 3 weeks later, my father said, come back. And my mother said her place is by her husband. And so she packed us up in Vienna and we went back into communism. We walked across the border, and I will never forget that moment. You know, they raised up the thingy for us, and we walked back into the communist country. And it was very, very difficult to be a teenager, lost many of my friends. And in school, when school started up, every other seat was empty because the families left Sopron. And then 10 years later, 1966, I came to America by marriage. So my being here is a delayed result of 1956 because I married somebody who came in 1956. So I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the revolution. But it was all meant to be like that, I guess.
Indeed. Are you 15 years old yet?
Almost.
Almost. Can you share your thoughts on what would you pack in your backpack? Or
Yeah, if I only had a single backpack, it would be hard to leave almost everything behind and only what's necessary, like clothes, maybe money, and everything else you have to bring, all your memories, any trace of them, you just have to leave it behind. And it would definitely be a difficult experience, to say the least, to leave everything you've ever known just for a chance at freedom or a better life.
thank you. My last question is for Maria. Would you take part in the revolution if today would be October 23rd, 1956?
I don't know. I was relatively young at that time, 23-year-old, and our family had a very difficult life under the communist era. We were deported from our home, and you know, my father lost his job, so I could never go to the university because I was osztályidegen. And so when I started working in a pharmaceutical company in Budapest, and so that's where I first heard on the 23rd that there is a student demonstration at the university. And so certainly, as a young person, I wanted to be there and know what's going on. And to my greatest surprise, at 2:30 when I reached Gellértér, where the university students started to walk to Ben Square, I remember I was just surprised that in the communist regime, where let's say, no 10 people could get together, because then immediately the police would ask what our intentions are. And all of a sudden I saw there thousands of university students, and they all went to BEM statue. And it was interesting for me because then I found out that they went to the BEM statue because it was actually a solidarity demonstration by the students with the Poles, who at that time also were asking the government to ease a little bit the restrictions and to give some freedom for them. And then when I got to BEM statue, there were thousands of people, and the Hungarian national anthem was sung, and many other patriotic Hungarian songs. There were poems read by artists, and you know, the whole atmosphere of these thousands of people. I mean, it was very, very new to me that something like that would happen. And then the whole group started going to the parliament, because they said, you know, there will be also a big get-together there. And by the time we reached the parliament, there must have been 500,000 people, which was, as I said, I don't know, it's very difficult to give the impression what you feel when in such an oppressive state of mind, so many people dare to demonstrate there. And eventually, you know, after the demonstration at the parliament, then certainly many people also went to the radio station, and it was actually the next day that I heard, you know, that there is actually really a revolution going on. And for me, when I first saw the first Hungarian flag, from which the red star was cut out, and then, you know, as you went in front of the buildings, you saw red stars on the ground. People were throwing it down, and they wanted to eliminate this hatred symbol. And so somehow, you know, at that time, you try to help in your own way somehow. And so I remember with my girlfriend, I said, let's go to the hospital and let's give blood, because there was so much bloodshed. And so we went and we gave blood, and then getting back to the hospital, we said, what about, isn't there a Red Cross star? Couldn't we go out and, you know, pick up the injured people on the streets? And so eventually it was a Red Cross car. There was a medical student there, and we were 3 other people there, and we just followed the streets in Budapest, and wherever there were injured people, we picked them up and brought them to the hospital. But at the same time, we also did hear that 14, 15-year-old young kids, they were resourceful enough to make the so-called Molotov cocktail. That is actually like a bottle of fuel, benzene, whatever. And when they went up on the 2nd or 3rd floor in the houses where the Russian tanks came, and they put a little cloth in there that they then lighted it with a match and threw, threw that glass bottle on the tank, and the benzene just flew everywhere and actually burned out the tanks. There were number of young people who just were very resourceful how to fight the Russian tanks. And it seems to me, for me as a young person, I really thought that maybe there is a way to change our way of life. And you felt that incredible unity of the nation. Everybody, young, old, male, female, everybody was participating in their own way. And as I said, the nation was never ever as united as for those 2 weeks time by the revolution lasted. So, and I think nowadays I am very happy that we are still remembering 1956, because I think today's young people should know, and as Yancy said, the Ukrainians are fighting the same struggle. They are also overpowered by these massive military Russian divisions, and it is. I feel for them because they are also fighting against their oppressor and for freedom. So yes, treasure your freedom here in the free land, and don't forget those who are dying for it.
My last question for the last young boy class. Would you take part in the uprising if it were to happen today?
That sounds like a very hard question to answer. Like, it would obviously have to be something that happens in like the heat of the moment, something that you would do without thinking.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
I couldn't really say whether I would right now, but if it did occur, then it would be something that I would, that future me will have to decide.
Thank you. That is a perfect answer. Thank you